Oh, my friends, it is good to see you. Hag Sameach to everybody who is celebrating Passover right now, and happy Holy Week to everyone who is celebrating Holy Week. Today, we find ourselves on the threshold of two of the largest religious holidays in both Judaism and Christianity, at least Western Christianity. Last night began the 7 day holiday of Pesach or Passover in the Jewish tradition. And today begins what's known as Holy Week in the Western Christian tradition, beginning with Palm Sunday today and then continuing through Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and Easter on Sunday. So, in the broad sense, one might say that these holidays celebrate renewal. Passover is ultimately about the liberation of Jews from slavery in Egypt. And Easter is ultimately about the resurrection of the Messiah. But as you come to know these holidays more closely, it's hard to ignore the incredible suffering and destruction that lead up to these glorious moments of liberation and resurrection. So I'm going to give you like a very quick rundown of the story of Pesach and the story of Holy Week, for those of you who aren't super familiar with either Jewish or Christian tradition, as many of us aren't. So, Passover, Pesach, is a time when Jews join together, often in their homes with family or friends. I know a lot of my friends are doing outdoor Pesachs this year, Seders this year, and have a ritual meal called a Seder. During the Seder, the gathering retells the story of the enslavement of the Jews in Egypt, as written in the book of Shemot, which is also known as the book of Exodus. And it's a complex story. The basics are that there were hundreds of years of enslavement, and at some point, Moses, who had been born a Jew and then raised as if he was a prince of Egypt, was told by God to go to demand that Pharaoh release the Israelites, release the slaves. And Pharaoh, the king, repeatedly said no to Moses. And every time he said no, a new plague struck Egypt. Pharaoh refused 9 times, and his country experienced 9 plagues: blood, pestilence, hail. These plagues caused enormous suffering to the people of Egypt. The Nile was turned to blood so that all the fish would die, and the people wouldn't be able to drink the water. And all the Egyptian livestock died, and the pestilence, all the trees and grass were demolished by the hail, etc. It was a time of great suffering, and still Pharaoh wouldn't release the Israelites. Finally, when he refused one more time, the final plague was foretold, that all of the firstborns in the land, the firstborn animals and humans, would die. Think about how many of us are firstborns here today. But God told the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb in their own households and paint some of the blood on the doorposts of their homes. This lamb's blood would be a sign to God that Jews lived in those homes, and God would pass over those homes. That's where the term Passover comes from. When God was killing all the firstborns, God would save these Jewish firstborns. This is the story of Passover, that the Jews were freed from slavery, but only after unimaginable suffering, both in their own hundreds of years of enslavement and the Egyptian peoples who lost their water and their livestock and their crops and trees and the firstborn of their families due to a king who refused to liberate the Jewish people. It's a story of liberation, but it's also a story of massive destruction and fury and suffering. And unfortunately, the story of Christian Holy Week isn't that much more cheerful. Jesus arrived in Jerusalem to the adoring crowds on Palm Sunday, this Sunday that's celebrated now in Western Christianity. But by Thursday, when he and his disciples celebrated their own Passover because they were Jewish, one of them was already planning on betraying him to the Roman soldiers. Jesus was arrested on Friday morning, put through a sham trial, stripped, tortured, forced to carry the heavy instrument of his own death through the hot sun, and then crucified and died on what's known as Good Friday. He spent Saturday in the tomb. A lot of his disciples ran away, and then on Sunday they discovered the tomb was empty, which is how the earliest scriptures tell of his resurrection. Not that they saw him be resurrected, but simply that his dead body was no longer there anymore, which must mean that he had been resurrected. It's a story of renewal and resurrection, yeah, but not until there had already been unfathomable betrayal by a close friend and horrific torture and murder. These are the stories that are going to be celebrated in synagogues and churches and homes of Jews and Christians around the world this week. So much anger and fury and rage is built into these stories that are considered to be some of the holiest in the Jewish and Christian traditions. And I think about the rage from the Jews who had been cruelly enslaved for hundreds of years in Egypt. I think about the fury that must have existed in the common people in Egypt who were forced to suffer 10 horrible plagues because their own power-hungry Pharaoh wasn't willing to release the Jewish slaves. It's ultimately a celebration of liberation, but only after unimaginable anger. And I think in Christianity about how much Western Christianity tends to portray Jesus as like completely placid and always calm and even-tempered, but the scriptures don't tell that story of him, about how angry Jesus must have been to be betrayed by his friends and suffer such an unjust death. How pissed off his disciples and his loved ones must have been at the massive forces that took their leader and ended his life. That ultimately Easter is about renewal, but only after horrific betrayal and anger. And so this day, as Pesach is getting underway and Western Christianity's Holy Week begins, I want to look at the role of anger in life, at the gifts of fury in our own stories as we strive towards liberation and renewal and resilience in our own lives. I can't help but start with my own reflections on how anger has worked in my life. I know that my culture, as a white person, particularly as a white woman, has taught me that controlling anger, minimizing my anger, is a sign of maturity. It's a sign of professionalism. It's a sign of trustworthiness sometimes. And although my brain knows that anger is just a feeling, and that we should never be ashamed about our feelings, that we feel mad, sad, glad, or scared, or some combination, many people believe that anger is an unacceptable feeling to feel, or that anger is actually just some piece of being scared or some piece of being sad, and that as soon as we're angry, we should shift our gears into feeling sad or scared because those are more acceptable feelings to feel. I know firsthand that when I express anger, a productive conversation can go from something positive to something that is immediately over. And so I choose to repress my own anger often, rather than have another person turn away from a conversation with me. And I know that there's more anger in me than the anger that I express, because I watch it come out when I am feeling unguarded. When I'm with those I love the most, the people that I feel safest with, who I feel most comfortable being myself with, I am more angry, both at the world and often at them. Sorry, family who's sitting in this room with me. Because I feel more safe with them, and so I'm less focused on repressing my own anger. I know that when my resources are low, when I'm hungry, or when my body hurts, or when I'm tired, or when I'm very pregnant, I'm more angry. My anger comes out more often. Sometimes when I have let my anger go unspoken for a long time, my release valve blows and my anger pours forth in a dramatic, relationship ending, life altering way, rather than just as anger being a small course correction in my life. It can be a catastrophic shattering in my life. I know the cost to my own soul of holding in my anger. But even in that self knowledge, even with years of practice, years of therapy, years of ministry, I still struggle with expressing my own anger regularly and appropriately when it arrives. And often I just use my brain to talk myself out of expressing my own anger. I recognize the cost of my anger to others because I know the cost of others' anger to me as well. The ways that anger of others can feel scary or out of control or unpredictable. The ways that others' anger can make me shut down. But over time, I've become better at letting another's anger be just that, be just a feeling that we never have to feel ashamed about, and learning from it rather than retreating from it. I'll say that I know that it's easier for me now to be present to another's anger than it is to trust that others are willing to be present to my anger. We each have our own stories around anger that come from our life experiences or from our identities. There are cultural expectations around how we control our anger or express it. There are gendered expectations. Men are allowed to show more rage than women, usually. Anger in white people means something different to the public story than anger in black people, which means something different than anger in people of Asian descent, and so on. And I know that anger can feel like abuse or destruction to people who were raised in angry homes, abusive homes. Writer and activist Audre Lorde says she's speaking about women, but I think it actually is pretty true for people of all genders. For people raised to fear, too often anger threatens annihilation, she writes. The anger of others is to be avoided at all costs because there was nothing to be learned from it but pain, she writes. That there's nothing to be learned from the anger of an abusive upbringing but pain, or a judgment that we have been bad, or that we have come up lacking, or that we have not done what we're supposed to do. Anger can feel like destruction. It can feel like abuse. And anger can feel like freedom, too. Anger can feel like a blessed release from a self-imposed or a society-imposed emotional cage. Audre Lorde talks about what she calls the uses of anger in a speech she gave 40 years ago in 1981, even though if you read it, as I did this week, I reread it this week, you might find that it sounds like it was written today. The speech is called The Uses of Anger, Women Responding to Racism, and she's primarily talking about where anger fits in racism and responding to racism between women. But she lifts up some really important things that I think are truths that go beyond that particular conversation. She talks about the uses of anger in three main ways. The first is that anger can give us power to fight oppression. It can be a source of courage and energy for us. She talks about anger as a light in dark places, as fiery warmth in cold places. Fire in an ice zone is the language she uses. When we are feeling shut down or ignored, when we are feeling like we are in an empty place, or that we are feeling alone, anger can be the energy that helps get us through that moment and back to a place that is safer for us. She says that anger is loaded with information, that it reveals important truths in our lives. Many of us compromise all the time, but then we find something that we cannot compromise on, right? Something that makes us furious, something that we get angry in order to protect. And it's often our deepest wisdom's way of telling us that that thing is too important for us to let go of, that it's too important for us to sacrifice. That anger can help point us to important truths in our lives. I know that anger also helps me find out where my own boundaries are. That sometimes when I get riled up, it's because something or someone has crossed my boundaries in ways that I didn't even recognize the boundary was there until the anger showed up. Anger is loaded with information for us and in others who are expressing it to us. She also talks about how anger can help us survive, how anger can help protect us from collapse when we are harmed. One of the things she says in that speech is, "My anger has meant pain for me, but it has also meant survival. And before I give it up, I'm going to be sure that there's something at least as powerful to replace it on the road to clarity." My anger has meant pain, but it has also meant survival. Before I give it up, I need something else just as powerful to replace it on the road to clarity. When we are harmed, sometimes we feel imprisoned by that harm. Sometimes we feel chained to those who hurt us. Sometimes we feel like the knife is still in our back, or that we're not yet able to enter a time of healing. And in those times, we need something powerful to protect our sense of self, to protect our knowledge of our own truth, or else we'll collapse into broken defeat, or we collapse into self-harm. When someone's harmed us and we get angry about it, the anger against that which hurt us gives our souls and ourselves and our truth strong protection until we can get to a space and a time for forgiveness and for healing and for restoration of our own power. Anger can protect us. It can help us survive. We are in the month where we're honoring the spiritual theme of resilience in our worship and in our congregational life. And I've mostly spoken about our anger from our own self perspective today, but I think of some of the importance of becoming resilient people is becoming comfortable with other people's anger as well, especially for those of us who were raised in environments or cultures that told us that anger wasn't okay or that anger was terrifying. That building our own ability to recognize another person's anger towards us or just near us is an incredibly powerful gift for us to be able to understand another, to be able to deepen relationships with another person, to be able to learn from another's truth and grow ourselves. Anger is just an emotion. We should never feel guilty for what we feel. And we should never make anyone else feel guilty for what they feel either. When we seek to build not only resilient selves, but resilient relationships and a resilient community, it's important for us to not disappear when anger shows up in that community or in those relationships or in ourselves. It's important for us to find ways to not take it so personally so that we don't collapse into guilt and shame and leave that relationship or leave the community that needs us in that moment. We are in a time of Passover in a time of Holy Week. We are looking towards liberation and freedom. We are looking towards resurrection and renewal. But liberation and resurrection never begin in an easy place. Liberation only comes after the cage. Resurrection only comes after death. And anger is a powerful part of all of our stories, no matter how much we may have spent our lives trying to squash it. Anger is not anything to be ashamed of. It can be a source of energy in our lives. It can be a source of important information to us. Anger can protect us. It can help us survive until we are ready for healing. My friends, as you go forth into this Passover, into this Holy Week, into this week that you may not be celebrating any particular religious holidays, but are simply dealing with the ongoing crush of COVID in our lives, or of all of the difficulties that we face as regular human beings. Being present to your own anger and to each other's anger can be an incredible gift to offer yourself. It can be an incredible gift to offer loved ones in your life and in your community. It can be a way to go deeper with yourself and others. It can be a way to unlock your own cage and help others unlock theirs. Being present to anger can help us make real the promise of honoring each other's inherent worth and dignity. So as we go forth in this week, may you find a new level of relationship with your own anger and with anger of those around you. The world needs us to be in touch with our fury, my friends. May it be so. Amen.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abbey Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abbey just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.